So maybe give me 10 and 5 if you can. Wait, just try. Test, test. Can you hear me? Perfect. So, bonjour, everybody. My name is Lorenz Breidenbach. I'm here from ETH Zurich and IC3, the initiative for cryptocurrencies and contracts. And today I will tell you about libsubmarine, an Ethereum library that allows you to temporarily hide transactions on Ethereum and defeat front-running. So this is based on research with my awesome collaborators, Phil Dion, Florian Traumer, and Ari Jules, as well as on development with my co-developers, Tyler Kell and Stefan Goslin. So a shout out to them. And let's dive right in. So why would you want to temporarily hide transactions on Ethereum? Why is this useful? Well, basically, whenever you have some sort of problem where you're worried about either somebody front-running you or in some other way benefiting from the knowledge that your transaction will be included in the blockchain in the future, then this is useful. So here's a few use cases. For example, for blind auctions, you want to hide the bids that are being made for the auction. For DEXs, you want to prevent front-running. For voting, you might want to hide who is participating in the vote until it's over. For challenge protocols, you have issues where cheaters can, upon observing that somebody else wants to challenge them, challenge themselves to lower the economic punishment that they would receive for having cheated. And then for bug bounties, for example, you also deal with sort of bug withholding attacks, which are also related to front running. So this pops up in a lot of contexts and perhaps even your dApp. So let me give you a brief intro to what front running is for those of you who don't know. So here we have an example where we have a user that wishes to purchase some tokens from a DEX contract that acts as an automated market maker. Think Bancor or think Uniswap, something along those lines. And so the user will broadcast a buy transaction to the Ethereum network. The transaction will bounce around the network, sit in the mempool, and then eventually get mined. Now what a front runner can do is he can profit at the user's expense. And the way he would do that is by sandwiching the user's transaction between two of his own transactions. So he would broadcast a buy transaction, maybe pay a miner some money or collude with the miner to get his buy transaction included in the blockchain before the user's buy transaction is included. And then he would immediately, after the user's buy transaction, include a sell transaction. Now what happens here then is that if we look at what happens to the price on the DEX, once the front runner's buy transaction arrives, the price on the DEX, so after this point, the price on the DEX will go up. Now our user's buy transaction will arrive and will buy at a higher price than she would have otherwise. And finally, our front runner sells again. So after all of this is done, the price on the DEX is exactly the same as if the front runner had not sent any transaction at all. But our user ended up paying more than she would have otherwise. And the difference between those two amounts, that's what the front runner pocketed at the user's expense. And so this attack is not just theoretical. A guy named Ivan Bogadi wrote a nice blog post about how he implemented this for Bancor. I think he computed that at the time he could make tens of thousands of dollars per month running this just against Bancor. And I think with the increased proliferation of various decentralized finance products, the lucrativeness of these attacks is only bound to increase. There's also an interesting project by IC3 as well, which is called frontrun.me, which monitors the gas markets on the Ethereum network in real time, and which I think indicates that by now there's a lot of parties who are sophisticated enough to do these sorts of attacks or perform these sort of games at the expense of unsophisticated users. So let's look at what went wrong here in the example, for example, of the DEX contract. The issue is that the user broadcasts some transaction to the contract, and this is observable to everybody. And it's not just the transaction that's observable, but also the amount that's attached to it. So both the data and the amount of money you're sending to the contract. And this is leakage that you don't want. So one thing that people sometimes do to sort of try to mitigate these kinds of things is to use something called a commit reveal scheme. So the way this would work is that the user would first send a commit transaction to the smart contract. The commit transaction would sort of use only a hash of the actual data the user wants to submit to the contract. So that would not be visible to the adversary. And then at a later stage, the user would reveal. And only then the smart contract would know what information the user wanted to pass to it and would take some application-specific decisions based on it. The problem here is that this send of funds, this commit, right, is still visible. So the adversary still sees how much money is being sent to the contract and still sees that a commit transaction occurred to that contract. And this on its own, in many cases, is too much information. So again, in the scenario of sort of an auction, right, seeing how much money somebody's bidding basically tells you all you want to know. And this is where Submarine Sends come in. So the sort of key idea for Submarine Sends is that we say we also do a commit reveal, but for us the commit goes not from the user to the contract directly, but from the user to what we call a submarine address. And this address has some special properties. So in particular, it looks just like a fresh address. So this commit transaction looks like the user sending some ether to a fresh, never before seen address on the Ethereum network. And so this commit transaction is hidden in a large anonymity set. So something like 2% of all transactions on the Ethereum mainnet look like this. And so now an adversary observing the network won't be able to tell what is a commit transaction and what isn't. In the second stage, the user then reveals to the smart contract, and the contract can verify the reveal, verify the commit, unlock the funds stored in the submarine address, and pull them out, and again, perform whatever application-specific logic you wanted to do. So this is nice, right? But now if you think about this more deeply, you should probably come up with some questions. So how exactly does this work? So the first problem is that we somehow need to establish the order in which commits occur, right? So we need to know when a commit occurred inside of our smart contract. So again, to go back to the example of an auction contract, the auction contract needs to ensure that bids only arrive during the bidding phase, not afterwards. And again, in the traditional world, sort of where you just send the commit transaction directly to the smart contract, that's easy to do because the contract can just timestamp that and record that in storage. But here the whole point is that nobody, not even the contract, saw this commit transaction. Only the user is aware of the fact that the transaction was a commit transaction. And so we need some way to let the contract know that it was a commit transaction and when it was included in the block. We need to prove when it was included. And so now we can exploit a property that the Ethereum block structure affords us, which is that all transactions are basically stored in a sort of more complicated version of a Merkle tree, which is called a Merkle-Patricia tree. And what in particular we can do with that is we can give efficient small proofs that a certain transaction was included in a block that then anybody can verify if they know the block hash. Sounds simple. Unfortunately, from an implementation perspective, it's quite tricky to do because these Merkle-Patricia proofs or trees that Ethereum uses just introduce a lot of implementation complexity. If you've ever sort of tried to do any sort of Ethereum client development, you're probably familiar with this problem. But we said, OK, let's do it. Let's bite the bullet. Let's shave the yak. I can happily tell you that the yak is now naked. And we implemented a library that allows you to easily verify these proofs inside Solidity, inside smart contracts. And you can also easily generate them off-chain. So you have an off-chain generator that generates such a proof, and then as part of the reveal, you submit the proof to the contract, and the contract can then just use the library to check that the proof is correct and that you indeed committed when you claim you committed. So this is the first challenge. The second challenge is how do you construct the submarine address? So if you remember, we need kind of 3 properties for this address. The first property is that we want to make sure that any funds that you send here to this address can only be unlocked by the smart contract. Nobody else should have access to them. Second of all, we want to make sure that the submarine address looks just like a regular fresh address, so that we have this anonymity set property. And finally, we need to ensure that the user can compute this address offline without having to interact with a contract on chain, because again, any such interaction would be observable to our adversary. And we used to do this using some pretty complicated ECDSA signature stuff. But since roughly 1 week ago, we have a new toy, which is the CreateToUp code, and that greatly simplifies how we do this. And so I wanted to give you a quick overview of how this works. And I think this kind of trick is very useful in general, and maybe you can also independently find it useful in your own contracts. So what we do here is what the CreateToUp code gives us is it computes the address of a contract that's deployed as a hash of the creator's address, of the code of the contract that's being deployed, and some user-supplied salt. And this is nice because we can basically send funds to an address where no contract exists yet, knowing that only a specific contract can be instantiated at that address. And this is exactly what we do here. So the user, to send this commit transaction, computes the submarine address as the address that would be used by a Create2 created contract, that is created by the receiver smart contract. The user knows this. Then a very, very simple smart contract that this smart contract will instantiate at the submarine address. It's literally 2 instructions, 2 bytes, and all it does is it immediately self-destructs and sends all funds back to this contract. So this is the unlock step. And as the salt, we can just use a hash commitment to whatever data the user wants to supply to the smart contract in the reveal stage. So this is neat. It's much simpler than what we had to do before. And I'm very happy that we have a 2-byte smart contract that's useful. So now you saw this kind of, as you see, is not super easy, right? There's quite a bit of complexity here. But our goal was to sort of abstract all of that away and package it into this nice library that you can hopefully easily use in your own projects. And so this is sort of a not quite complete, but almost complete sketch of what a simple blind auction contract would look like that uses libsubmarine. So first of all, you simply, you inherit from the libsubmarine simple contract to bring in all that functionality that we just talked about. And secondly, you basically only need to implement a handler function that is sort of an abstract function in the base contract that you then implement and then will be called when a user performs a valid reveal. So the base contract will take care of all of the logic of checking that the reveal is valid, that the commit was valid, how much money was sent, in what block the commit was done, what the index of the commit transaction in that block was, etc. And it will simply supply all this information to your sort of handler function that can then do the application-specific logic. So in this example, I simply check that the commit was done while the commit period happened, so kind of like the bidding period in the auction example, that the reveal was done during some, again, limited reveal period. Then, just for the fun of it, we say you need to bid at least 0.1 Ether for this auction. We require that each bidder can only make at most 1 bid. And finally, we just do the update of who has made the best bid so far. And then what you don't see here, but what you would probably see is some extra function where then once everything is over, the winner can withdraw their whatever CryptoKitty that they bought, and the losers can get back the money that they put into the contract because they're not getting the CryptoKitty. So this brings us to the question then, how much gas does all of this cost, right? It all sounds nice, but is it feasible? Is it useful in practice? And so I'm very happy to report that since DevCon, we have substantially optimized the contract and have now brought it down to what I would argue is a fairly feasible gas overhead in practice. So compared to sort of just writing your contract without using libsubmarine, you pay an extra 90,000 gas in total for sort of the typical flow that a user would go through. 21,000 gas are just this commit transaction, which is just the regular send of ETH to an address that looks like a fresh address. And then 69,000 gas result from this reveal and unlock logic that I described to you. Yeah, that's it. Check out our website at libsubmarine.org. Check out our code. It's all open source. No token, no ICO. On GitHub. Wow, that was a pretty enthusiastic response to that. Yeah, and if you have any questions, contact me after the talk, ask now, DM us, file a Twitter issue, whatever your preferred mode of communication is. Thanks, everyone.
Can we have a question? Lorenz?
Okay, so apparently we have time for 2 questions if anybody wants to ask a question.
So
go ahead.
First question here. So do I understand it correctly that it's so cheap in terms of gas that it's actually cheaper than traditional hash-based commit and reveal, and it's obsoleted it? So this is better in every possible way.
I mean, traditional sort of commit and reveal would, I think, still be a little bit cheaper, right? If you just look at the overhead you introduce over whatever you're doing, you basically have the sort of commit transaction, which would be probably something on the order of, say, 40,000 or so, right? Because you roughly pay 21,000 as the base price, and then 20,000 to store the commit hash, and then in the reveal, you would basically just kind of maybe make 1 more storage update, so that's another 40,000. So then you pay 80,000, which is less. So it's a little more expensive, but not much. Yeah.
Just a quick question: aren't we re-centralizing it a bit here? meaning that we are using a third party for each transaction?
No, so just to be clear, so this is all entirely, maybe this is a good diagram for it. So this is all entirely trustless, purely in smart contracts. There is no third party, no re-centralization, because this submarine address, right, you can just through some sort of Ethereum magic compute that address, send funds to it, and only the smart contract can access it, so you don't trust any additional third parties.
It's a dynamic address.
Sorry?
A dynamic address that you built?
Right, the address is computed dynamically, exactly. All right, thanks everyone.